Okay. A very good afternoon, ma'am, and thank you so much for agreeing to speak to us. We have with us Dr. Maya John. She's an assistant professor of history at the Jesus and Mary College, and she was also the first female president of St. Stephen's College and St. Stephen's College Union during her tenure there as a student from 2003 and 2006, if I'm not wrong, ma'am. So, ma'am, I mean, of course, we are here to discuss the IPCW issue and what has been transpiring for the last few days. But before we directly jump into that, I mean, a lot of us here know that, you have played a seminal role in the history of fighting for spaces and fighting for spaces for women in this university. You yourself fought for spaces for women and hostel infrastructure when you were a student yourself at St. Stephen's College. And it's been almost 20 years since that struggle, and you fought that fight, you faced that struggle, and you put forward your claims. And 20 years later, this is the situation that you see now. As a professor now at the same university space, how do you react to the situation?
So first of all, thank you for giving me this opportunity to share, um, you know, an insight and also sum up the disappointments that stem from, experiences that are repeating themselves in a space like Delhi University. Now, in response to your question, I would say that, of course, the Delhi University's campuses, North and South campus, have proven to be very, unsafe spaces for women students and women karamcharis, women teachers. And the reality is that it's not just an unsafe space in terms of, sexual harassment, being a pervasive problem, but it is a space which is highly unequal, and that therefore it's a very contentious space. And one's own experience, as you traced it back to my student days some 20 years back, that was precisely the nature of the university, that it was this very, prestigious space that was admitting women students, women researchers, women teachers, non-teaching staff, but it remained a space in which infrastructural inequality or structural inequality was very, very embedded. So, all the premier, colleges, like St. Stephen's, Hindu, many other colleges at the time in the early 2000s, did not have residential facility or adequate residential facility for their women students. So, most of the women students who came from, outside Delhi struggled, in off-campus accommodations where very often victims of harassment, both sexual harassment and other forms of harassment at the hands of landlords or people who ran these paying guest accommodations in private hostels. The space in terms of negotiating from college to your own private accommodation has never been a very pleasant one. Many women students have faced street harassment in that whole process of commuting. So, there was this, we're getting into these, hallowed realms of higher education, the best colleges, but always being somewhere pushed out after 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock in the evening, because it was like, go back from where you came to your Delhi home or to your private accommodation. And of course, that ate into, the involvement of many women students and researchers in terms of, how much time they could give for co-curricular life and other kinds of contributions to an institution. And that is why, many of us, when we were students, we fought this battle that, why isn't there inequality in space? Why isn't there inequality when it comes to distribution of something so fundamental like a residential accommodation? Why is there no effort by the university authorities to, make even some kind of regulatory paradigm for places where their students end up staying and paying for private accommodation? So where's the whole effort to at least have some kind of rent agreement and safety audits? None of that. So of course, back then in the early 2000s, we launched what was known as the campaign for more women's hostels and safe neighborhoods. And of course, that's been a journey that has taken, that has in present times, it's taken newer forms, etc., because it remains an unaddressed issue. Even when the University of Delhi has opened, hostels, or individual colleges have opened hostels in the decade, the 2000 decade, uh, they have not again catered enough. There never been enough seats, as many applicants. Two, they've been very expensive. It's worrying to see the cost of hostel fees continuously go up, especially the new hostels that were built by colleges and by the University of Delhi. Two, it's worrying to see the way in the way in which many of these hostels administrations function in a very disciplinarian, undemocratic way, with rules that don't necessarily, reflect the times and needs of, the women students. And thirdly, just to give you another example of how, there is so much structural or systemic, insensitivity and in fact gender bias. It's every time we have these festivals like Holi being celebrated on campus. It's always the women's hostels on campus which are held hostage. The students in the women's hostels can't step out; they're locked in. And meanwhile, from the neighboring men's hostels, especially I'm talking about the postgraduate men's hostels in North Campus, they take out these filthy rallies, basically holding the streets outside the women's hostels hostage for 4 or 5 hours. And very often it's very much in the knowledge of the proctor's office of Delhi University. So they know that there is this, a practice that happens and there's no effort to stop it. This is despite representations. I remember when I was staying in a postgraduate women's hostel called University Hostel for Women, we were writing representations like 1 week before Holi saying we don't want to be held hostage and you should stop this rally by men students. To, no effect. The university authorities are like, there's a tradition, we'll have a police accompanying them so they won't, misbehave. So that I felt that was even more ridiculous to have police accompanying, a rally of men who are drunk and are taking over the street, and basically making movement, public movement, difficult. So this is the kind of tradition that one has seen. And I would also connect it to the fact that um, there is a lot of what we're seeing in IP College, the incident of 28th March, and then the subsequent crackdown on, students who are asking for accountabilities, who are raising this question that why did such a security lapse happen? And I just want to explain this particular incident in terms of a longer history of a lot of institutional apathy and tolerance. In fact, tolerance, and in that ways, covert, uh, you know, a kind of a covert sympathy, I would say a complicity for this culture of sexual harassment. Now, interestingly, IP College around 2008 was again besieged by a similar incident of, women students of the college being attacked by groups of men, and being groped and being molested. And this incident was actually at the hands of men who had come to appear in neighboring government schools for the Delhi Police Constabulary exam. And this, and because IP College, students, were a large number of victims that day, but I feel across the city of Delhi that day, because men had appeared from different areas for this Delhi police exam, there must have been in different parts of the city a similar, horrible experience unfold with young girls and women who must have been attacked like this by mobs of men who they couldn't then obviously identify. IP College, of course, galvanized, I remember, and there was a huge protest. And, questions were asked of the vice chancellor, in terms of why didn't his team, knowing that there'd be an exam like this happening in many areas in the campus, why was there no beefing up of security? Why was the police not willing to cancel this exam? Because, you couldn't identify who the culprits were, but these are men who were going to become policemen themselves. So how could you let them get away? It's very important to send out a message, a public message that this exam is cancelled because, this is how many of the candidates, behaved. So of course it was a huge struggle, and this just because this institutional apathy. Again, there was a crackdown by the IP college principal. I remember back then in 2008, asking students not to protest. We know the Delhi police never agreed to cancel that exam, and we even went up right up to the Home Ministry of Delhi, Home Ministry of the Government of India, because Delhi police comes under the central government, and to no avail. And that's the level to which sexual harassment in these incidents are normalized. And it becomes like this kind of thing. You are exaggerating. It wasn't that bad. How many cases were there? Show the documentation. And even right now, in the case of IP College, the college administration, people higher up in Delhi University are just like, where is their proof? And there's this then, this denial that it actually happened, whereas students, have so much to actually very, very clearly share what happened to them that night on March 28th. So, I would say that because of this larger institutional apathy that goes right up to the top level, it's not surprising that, we continue as a university, and of course the local police stations also continue to turn a blind eye to these experiences, and make them seem as if they're never that big scale. Okay? And they're actually being exaggerated by women who've clearly lost their mind. So that is, the paradigm. The second thing I wanted to bring in today in terms of an experience is when you look at institutional apathy and how that breeds a lot of sexism, and it breeds an unhealthy culture of, you can harass a woman and get away with it. That sense of, you can get away with it. Is the way in which this university treats, women students who are so vulnerable, and they come for these few handful of classes on Sundays and on gazetted holidays, which is the School of Open Learning Correspondence Mode of Delhi University. And the way those women are treated, Anwesh, it's ridiculous. Everyone from, officials to guards, at the various centers of School of Open Learning, they treat these women as if, they shouldn't be there. They shouldn't be on campus. So they treat them like dirt. And you see, it's also about how university space is also considered as somebody's, Raj. I literally say it's some people treat it as if it's their private property, not a public space that needs to be shared, that needs to be made safe, that needs to be made egalitarian. So the way in which these women students of School of Open Learning are just herded around like they're cattle, shoved into these classrooms, 200, 300 of them in a class which can only seat 80, 90 students, and then, shoved out of the campus of Delhi University saying, Jao, class is over. I mean, that's precisely that what translates into how centers of School of Open Learning then treat these women students by putting up notices. Don't take selfies and comb your hair or roam around in the corridor. That kind of so patriarchal gaze, it just keeps getting replicated, and then it can so easily, translate into somebody misbehaving with these women, because they're treated as if they're riffraff, they're treated as if they don't belong here. And I think that is it. DU very often has not made itself a safe space, an egalitarian space for so many people, including women. And so this problem is going to keep coming up. And whenever it comes up, there's always going to be an effort to deny it. There's always going to be an effort to brush it under the carpet. And that is why, students and women activists and other concerned people have to protest. And I think it's ridiculous the way in which we can see Delhi police being mobilized to crush democratic student protests so easily. Like they'll come down with, such large numbers and riot police equipment, etc. But where are they, and why are they not mobilized as a preemptive measure in situations like, college fests or big public functions? That's my question. So it's obviously a very selective use of policing, and it reflects more on the insensitivity of institutions and administrators. And therefore it's something that we need to keep fighting against.
I'm so glad you brought up the 2008 incident, because that was part of the research where I was reading up on the history, because I also wanted to see that this was not an isolated event. Just last year we had the horrific incident at Miranda House, and that was not lesson enough. But you were talking about the police force, and there was this picture that a photojournalist from our team took at arts faculty the day the protest was. And it felt like, like we were in some sort of a riot situation, because that was the kind of army personnel who, that was deployed in arts faculty, and there were people could not move, the rickshaws could not move, and there was a traffic jam. But this also brings me to the idea of institutional apathy, which you so beautifully, elaborated upon. And right now, Shambhavi, who's a student from IPCW, is currently under a show cause notice, because they were one of the most vocal students as far as, asking for accountability is concerned. And that also brings to light this history that exists in this so-called public university, which, is supposed to stand for the liberal arts and, everything that's, democratic and egalitarian, where, whenever you ask for this accountability, there's a certain kind of repression and suppression that happens as far as your voices are concerned. I mean, there are the two students who are currently suspended from giving examinations because they tried to screen the BBC documentary at arts faculty. Shambhavi is under a show cause notice. And it's also very interesting that, this incident is also chronologically happening 5 years after the 2017 incident at Ramjas, where, so many lives of students and professors went into danger because they just said that, this was an academic space and we are trying to have an academic discussion. So as someone who has also undergone this fight, and, from what I know, you were also denied admission to the master's program at St. Stephen's College, which is why you had to go to Miranda House to pursue your master's. How do you deal with this even after so many years? And how do these students make sense of, just asking for their basic rights and asking for accountability? And also for students around them, because, there are so many vulnerable students who come from such faraway cities and spaces in this country. And, these are basic rights they're fighting for. But, they just don't find it in themselves to ask these questions, because this is the kind of repression and suppression you're met with when you ask these questions. So how do you reconcile this entire situation with this kind of fear?
See, one way in which, because as a activist right from my student days, I've learned it the hard way, which is that you tackle people's hesitation and you tackle people's fear, and you also tackle the very concrete victimization that is unfolded through, of course, being very strategic in the way you plan the next level of your agitation, that you take as many students along, as many participants along, so you never get isolated. Thirdly, it also means, um, tapping networks, preparing the struggle in a way in which you're also putting pressure on the authorities who you are confronting uh, from multiple, sides, from multiple dimensions. You put getting pressure put on them. So, it's not just as if, the students of one particular institution are pitched against, their administrator, their college administration, but the college administration is also made to feel pressure from other, you know, areas, from other sections. So therefore, the way in which you plan the struggle and carry it forward through consultation, through as democratic means, as strategic means as possible, it becomes important because, in this case, it'll be interesting to see how other, other groups, are putting student groups, women's organizations, women's activists, alumni, they're all going to, how they get galvanized and put pressure on not just the concerned, college administration or institution in the center of the storm, but generally even on everyone else who is supposed to be accountable. So then it's like, everyone from the Delhi University's, big wigs, to, in this case, this particular college, IP college principal, to, to the Delhi Commission for Women, to the, Delhi police, that, this incident has happened and, there has been precedent for it. Why have you allowed it to happen? Right. And, just putting pressure from different forces, from different, dimensions becomes very important. And secondly, I'd say, you have to fight. I mean, you have to fight, because if you don't fight, then you don't get anything, right? But if you fight, you stand up, you keep the collective, mobilization going, then at least you're able to, change, the challenge the apathy and change the general ambience that people, in administration have ki ye to chalta hai, So as long as you fight back and you keep that going, and of course you connect and build the next phase of the movement in a strategic way, you do push back the apathy and you do push for, accountability. And whoever is so right now very comfortable in their, office and enjoying their power feels the pressure, right? So I'm sure currently the principal is having her own share of sleepless nights, right? So my point is, we have to remember that um, it's the continuous efforts that end in important change, right? And two, if you don't fight, nothing will change. If you fight and you bring people together, then of course it is one important step in democratizing spaces, in democratizing the way universities function. Because remember, this is still a university space. It's not as hostile as it can get in terms of a workplace or the world outside. So, I mean, if you can bring them to their knees, which is still a relatively more cushioned space, a university, then you are, of course, it's an important battle that women students are winning.
Absolutely. And there were two final questions I wanted to end this thing with. And the first one being that because you're also a professor of history, I just could not stop myself from asking this question that, whenever these debates about university spaces come in, there's also a lot of literature, a lot of writing that is produced in terms of how Delhi University, the North Campus especially, is constructed as a space because it's not a closed campus like you have in many private universities. I mean, you have students who are literally staying in very residential parts of the city of Delhi, be it in Vijayanagar or be it in Kamlanagar, which and then in the center of this space you have these isolated and not isolated particularly, but these spread out university college buildings which are connected through many roads with each other. And a lot of students, I mean, almost 80% of students who do not get the hostel spaces, which only go to students who achieve a certain cutoff, mostly in most colleges, have to resort to getting flats or PGs in these areas, which has turned this entire accommodation business into such a thriving business for landowners who exploit these students. And I mean, I myself have so many female friends and gender minority friends who've been sexually harassed and assaulted by landowners and have been in very vulnerable positions in the middle of the night. And they're staying far away from their families, who they can't even inform about these situations because that puts them at greater risk. Um, do you think that this sort of architectural structuring of the university space also plays into this narrative of the space not being safe enough for its students? And if yes, then, is there any way, we can find a way around this?
So one major change that is needed is, of course, for the university to create more of its own accommodation. And when I say that the university needs to, provide for as many needy and outstation students, I'm saying this, of course, also it has to be an affordable accommodation. As I had mentioned a few minutes back, even in the university constructs new hostels in the last 10, 12 years, it's made them very expensive. And the facilities provided in them have been questionable. I think all of us know about the Rajiv Gandhi undergraduate women's hostel and the whole water problem and other problems there. So, of course, the university needs to take provision of hostel accommodation very seriously. And that is a struggle and an infrastructural resource that, we need to demand for. Because, ultimately regulating private accommodation is not going to be an easy task. There are just so many places, and that is why I would say that it's an important struggle to push for, which is that the university itself provides safe and affordable accommodation for those who need it. Um, And I say that, making Delhi University a closed campus is again something that perhaps we will not be able to immediately achieve, right? And I would say that even if it became a closed campus, it doesn't mean that within classrooms, within college buildings, within college lawns, harassment won't happen, and be brushed under the carpet. So, let's face it, the closed open campus is not such an important solution. What is very important is that we equalize the space, so that means we provide a residential accommodation, more of it, so that students, especially women students, are not left in these vulnerable conditions and paying through their nose, just to be able to come and study here.
I think the beauty of the university is that it is such an open campus. And that's why whenever I read these arguments, it really, really annoys me so much, because that is the beauty of this campus. And just last question before we end this interview is that, like you said, that there are so many authorities and institutions which ask, whenever these incidents of violence happen, women and gender minorities are asked to prove. And this entire culture of ये तो चलता है, and probably आप लोग ज़्यादा बोल रहे हो, it was just something not to be worried about. This entire culture has always placed women and other minorities at this pedestal where they have to prove their oppression. And yesterday, when I was I was out a little late in the night, and I was coming back, and I saw the North Campus claim the night march, and that's something that's been going on for a while now. And so, what do you think is the role of these, communes, like Dastak, and which are coming together and forming these communes where they're getting women off the campus to go out there, march in the night, spend the entire night singing, reading poetry, talking to each other, walking the campus, and sort of claiming the night. And what other ways are there, to sort of show that that these stories are real stories, and that the institutions need to believe us when we say that this has happened to us, and this is violence that is real, which we face on a daily basis.
Yeah, definitely. These are interesting and important initiatives. These marches, etc. But as I said, a lot of the bad experiences don't happen necessarily in the night. Our fighting for a safe, more democratized space in Delhi University requires us to build many other kinds of struggles and movements and initiatives. I would say that there are lakhs of women students languishing like second-class citizens in School of Open Learning. I mean, I think fighting that battle, about uh, getting them more, I'll say it like this, getting them more classes and more access to the university space, that's so many more women on campus, right? And numbers make a difference. Numbers make a difference in terms of making a space, just deal with the physical presence of so many more women. So I definitely think that, there are many structural things that need to change, and struggles for them, which will, make the university space truly more inclusive and truly more sensitive, right? So I would say that, of course, while night marches and, awareness building is important, it's also about how the space for, in the morning hours, how democratizes the space, how many more women have quality access to the university, to the general, hours during the day. And thirdly, this whole thing about also the way in which our hostel accommodations that do exist, the way in which they function through their rules of, the in timing and out timing. That is also something that, we need to fight, and, we need to get them rationalized, because, again, the whole culture of locking up women at 9 o'clock at night is really not, a solution, right? Because again, having a vacant, lonely roads outside, the campus after 9 o'clock is again not something that helps, or makes the space necessarily safe. So, of course, even the way in which existing university hostels rules function about, when a woman can enter the hostel or leave it. These are all the different initiatives that are also needed and are important to fight for.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And thank you so much for raising the issue of the SOL as well, because that is something that we often do not talk about in the mainstream as much as we do about other issues. And that is, as burning an issue as far as, claiming spaces and visibility is concerned in this university. And thank you for agreeing to do this interview at such a short notice. And we genuinely hope that, that people realize that the IPCW struggle, it's not an isolated struggle. It's part of a larger history of fighting for spaces and visibility in this university. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you for the opportunity.